We're going to be starting our webinar now. So in honor of March being Women's History Month, this webinar episode features two very strong, dynamic businesswomen, Anna Fitzgibbon and Jeanne Martin. So thank you both so much for coming and sharing your stories about your professional life with us. And also thank you to everybody that is currently logging on right now. We greatly appreciate it. My name is Heather Martz-Keller, and I'm a marketing associate here at DTC. And for those of you who may not be completely fully aware of what DTC is, we are an IT company, specifically a managed services provider that serves clients in multiple IT-related sectors. So now I'm going to turn it over to my counterpart.
So hello, everyone. My name is Victoria Doda. I'm also one of the marketing associates here at DTC. I also want to thank Jeanne and Anna for being here today, and I just want to give you a little bit of background about our webinar series. So this year's theme is creating connections, and that's the name of our series. And basically what our goal here is to become a resource for everyone, all of our clients, our partners, just people tuning in, just to kind of create connections throughout the year. So each month we're going to feature a webinar that's just varying topics, and you guys can follow along with us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn to kind of keep up with what we're doing and see what next exciting topic we'll have. And then just so everyone does know that we're going to have a recorded recap at the end of this, so you can go back and listen in, and any questions you might have, you can follow back up with later.
Yeah, so with that, again, I would just like to thank you, Jeanne, for being here. Jeanne is the Chief Operating Officer at Workplace Advisors, and Anna is the founder and owner of OutGrowth. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to you guys. And Jeanne, if you'd like to give your introduction, you can take it away.
Sure. So as you just heard, my name is Jeanne Martin. I am the COO, Chief Operating Officer of Workplace Advisors, which is a wealth management company. The irony is I just got to that at my mid-50s, or actually 60, now that I think about it. But I am a former teacher. I used to teach middle school for a few years. And I then wound up in the tech industry where I spent the vast majority, 30 plus years, sales management. I ran a global board of senior leaders for Cisco services, and my last 4 years at Cisco, I ran global services, diversity and inclusion space, which I found the passion I didn't know I had in my mid-50s, which is kind of cool to be able to say. So I've taken all of that, and I'm obviously at the other end of my career from these two lovely ladies. And so I'm working a couple days a week now. I'm doing some consulting, which is great. So that 30 years has really positioned me well to be able to do that.
Very amazing. And then, so just so everyone's aware, on the webinar, we are having some technical difficulties. So Anna is on the phone here, and she's going to be speaking through that. And so she's going to be speaking, but if you could let Jeanne know if you can hear her fine when she starts talking as well. So if you want to go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you for, putting up these technical difficulties. My name is Anna Fitzgibbon. I am so excited to be here today. So a little bit of background on me. I have a career and a background in higher education and experiential learning. And I earned my MBA about 3 years ago from the Carey Business School here at Johns Hopkins University. And then for the past 3+ years, I have run my own business. And my business is called OutGrowth. And basically what I do is I take students and professional teams out of the office, out of the workplace, and immerse them in new and different experiences that can help to shape their professional paths. And so I love what I do. I now get to also work as an adjunct faculty at Johns Hopkins in their innovation and human-centered design department. And so that's kind of what has led me here today. It's a somewhat diverse professional path, but at the center of it is, helping others to have really meaningful, transformative, immersive experiences. And I'm just kind of excited to see where my career takes me so that I can kind of continue to live out those values.
Love that. Yeah.
So our topic for this webinar is working women, and it's going to be an open panel-like discussion with both Jeanne Martin and Anna Fitzgibbon. So we can go ahead and get started.
So our first question is, what advice would you share with young women entering a male-dominated profession? And Jeanne's going to start us off with this question.
Nothing like starting out with A very big question. So obviously I spent 30 years in tech, as I said, and I don't know that they come a lot more male dominated than that. Having said that, a lot has changed, but not a lot has changed. And so one of the things I find when I talk to younger women, especially those in school that have not gotten out into the workforce, is they think that things are so much better that they don't have to worry about certain things anymore. And that's not the case. So we still have a long way to go, but we need to be aware of the environment into which we're walking. So we need to do our homework and ensure that that we know what we're walking into and that we're prepared to do what we need to do to succeed in that. What that means, though, things like don't start what you don't want to continue. So if I get very stereotypical and say, if they're asking you always to take notes, you need to stop that sooner than letting it go. The longer you let it go, the more you get thought of in those kinds of areas. That's not to say never pitch in. If everybody does notes, then everybody takes their turn as notes. That's fine. But if you start to find yourself being relegated to certain duties, you need to really stop it in a professional way, but you need to stop it to make sure that you don't get stuck. And it's really easy to get stuck before you even know it happens. I would also say become part of the team. Just because you're the only one, and I was the only one 90% of the time. I've hiked mountains. I've done all this crap I didn't want to do. But I was part of the team, and that is still important. It's really important. That doesn't mean you don't try and shift things to be a little more neutral in terms of the kinds of team building and so forth that you do, and that is possible. But it also means that that is the reality, and you have to understand that going in. So you have to play along to some degree. I'm not telling you to sell your soul to the devil kind of thing, but you have to play along to some degree, because until we get enough women into all of these areas, it will not materially change without us really pushing that. The biggest thing, though, is networking. If I had a dime for every woman that said to me, I just thought if I put my head down and worked really hard, I'd get ahead. I'm like, oh, God, that's not how it works. Now, I'm used to big companies, but it's the same in smaller companies. Networking is key. It's not just who you know, but it's who you know that knows what you know and what you can do. Who's talking about you when you're not in the room? Mentorship is key. You should have mentors for a reason, a season, and a lifetime. Sponsorship is king. Sponsorship is the difference between you getting opportunities and you not. And so looking down, doing your work, those are table stakes. Being good at what you do is table stakes. How do you look above, and not just in your organization, but across departments, so that other people, Anna and I both had something in common in our original introduction, where we had diverse paths. Ironically, both started in education. I don't know, I'm not going to talk. I have no idea how old Anna is, and I'm not going to go there. But for me, growing up in the 70s, there weren't a lot of thoughts that you had about what you could be. And a teacher was what you saw every day. And so that's what I was going to be. And I loved it. I never intended to leave. But that leads me to my second point. When someone knocks on the door, open it. Two of my most favorite jobs I didn't even know existed, and certainly didn't think I'd be qualified at Cisco, and they came to me. And it was executives that came to me. And the second time, it was because of the role I had the first time. So you never know where your path will lead. Yes, you need to have a plan, but you need to be open to divergent paths, because they can bring you to a passion you didn't know you had, as it did for me. So that being said, all of that in a male-dominated profession does not change, but you have to make sure you understand what you're working with. And
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I'll just add on to Jeanne's phenomenal response, which was really, really wonderful. I enjoyed listening to that, Jeanne. What I would just add on is that I think it's really important that we as women start to check in on some of those things within ourselves that can hold us back when making the next move in a career. And so I feel like this is maybe a more abstract response than Jeanne's, but I do think, lending from or kind of borrowing from Sheryl Sandberg's points of leaning in, just understanding that we as women have a seat at the table and we have a right to have a seat at the table. And so I think, painting with a bit of a broad strokes here, that women tend to have more than men this sense of imposter syndrome, where they feel like maybe they're not good enough or not talented enough to be at the table, especially if you don't have a personality that's maybe as assertive as your male counterparts. And so I think that it's important within these kind of smaller decision points that happen throughout a day or throughout a week that we start to recognize within ourselves those moments of self-doubt, those moments of imposter syndrome that can maybe shape the way that we proceed forward in a meeting or sharing an idea or even disagreeing with a point. And I think the more that we can start to almost retrain ourselves to see ourselves as worthy of being there and as valuable employees, that will trickle down into really important discussions in the workplace and also into, kind of bigger long-term goals like negotiations and salary bumps and promotions. Going hand in hand with that, though, I'd offer one other kind of slightly different, almost not counter to what I just said, but just another angle. I think it's really important, too, that we as women don't try to completely assimilate in a male-dominated workforce. I think that women have, and again, this is broad strokes, but women have a lot of really wonderful characteristics and styles of leadership and methods and practices for working with their teams that have proven to be really highly effective and even more effective than traditional male styles. And a great example of this is vulnerability. There are leaders, it's shown now that leaders who exhibit vulnerability and can help to encourage vulnerability in their teams are actually better leaders. And so just kind of understanding that while, yes, there are certain moments where you need to step up to the plate and, exhibit a point really strongly and be assertive, that also kind of coming as you are and understanding that there's inherent value in your style and approach, even if it doesn't look like what everyone else is doing, and just kind of having that confidence.
Thank you, Anna.
Can I add to that? Because I think that's an excellent point. And I reported into an SVP in engineering, of which all the other VPs were engineers. But every one of them would tell you that their engineering skills had suffered as they rose up the ranks, which makes, to Anna's point, those other skills, which tend to be called soft skills, which by that very term diminishes their importance, is what gets you those jobs at the top. Because your widget skills aren't going to make you a VP. But your people skills, your networking skills, your knowing who you are and how to rally troops and so forth, which those tend to be things, not all, but tend to be things that women have more consistently than men for a lot of reasons. Another webinar. That is what gets you up the ranks.
Totally agree, Jeanne. Totally agree.
Yeah, and that flows very nicely into our next question, which is, what is something you wish you knew when you first started out your career?
So I think for me, I wish I had known that there really aren't any rules when it comes to how you can design a career and how you can design a life. And I think to an extent, I knew that I didn't have to, quote unquote, obey the rules, that I could kind of carve my own path. But I think at a younger age, I saw those choices that I made. For instance, after college, went backpacking and didn't just take a traditional gap year. I went away for 5 years, and I was warned by everybody, there are going to be huge gaps in your resume, and, you're going to be starting entry level when your peers are your managers. And so I was kind of forewarned that by not obeying the quote unquote rules of a traditional career path, that there would be consequences. So it's not to say that I obeyed the rules, but that I always kind of knew there was a trade-off, and that if I didn't follow the traditional path, that there would be these huge consequences, and that was just something I would have to deal with. And now looking back, and granted times have changed also, so that's worked in my favor. But, I wish I had known how many opportunities there are without any time really wasted to pivot, to start over, to throw out the whole thing and start from scratch. And how not only is it possible and is there time and space to do that, but also there's tremendous value in that. And I think, there's always this, huge fear of failure that people have, whether you start a business or you're going down a career path. And, as Jeanne and I both talked about our very diverse career paths, and maybe Jeanne would agree, I feel like there's this, for me, a sense of failing forward, that every time I move forward, even if it doesn't work out, even if there's some tough lessons, I'm actually still moving up the ladder. It's just my own personal ladder and not the ladder that's been outlined or dictated for me. And so I wish I kind of knew going into my career how much flexibility there was, because I think that even though I took risks, I don't think I would have been as wary of them as I was had I known that.
It's a great point, Anna. We called it a lattice versus a ladder, because there's a million different ways to get where you want to go.
Absolutely, I love that. I'm going to use that.
Sure. I didn't, start it, so I stole it too. So it's all good. I think for me, again, I grew up in a very different time than we have now. I wish we had webinars like this. I wish we had some more conversation about. I think of the conversations I had with my granddaughter about starting out, and I'm like, God, I wish I had had that when I was a kid. It just would have been so different, but maybe not. Who knows? But one thing I really learned, and I didn't learn this until later, but you have a brand, whether you know it or not. You have a brand, and that I want that to sink in. Because for too many of us, and this I would not say is simply women, but specifically women, we have a brand, we don't know it. Which means we could be putting anything out there and we think we're doing this, and it's actually that people see. The second piece of that is other people's perception of you is your reality. We do not live in a vacuum. So I talk a lot. And I mean, I've heard this since I was a kid. You can ask Stephen, he'll tell you. But I talk a lot. Now, as a teacher, that was great. My granddaughters roll their eyes, and that's okay. I am who I am. I'm comfortable in that. I'm at that stage. I can say that. But in business, you have to understand how people perceive you, because you being able to get your point across depends on them being able to receive your point in a way that they are comfortable with and can act upon, as opposed to shutting you out. So know what brand you want. Ask around about what people see about you. What is the brand that they're getting off of you, the vibe that they're getting? Is there a congruency or is there a disconnect? And do what you need to do to shape it the way you want, not the way someone else wants. I use the analogy of parallel parking for almost everything, because sometimes it's just not a good fit, and you can wiggle around in that parking place all you want. You are not going to get in there. That's how some jobs are. That's how some companies are. That's how some industries are. That's how some marriages are. Take your pick. You can only wiggle around in that space for so long that you have to come to terms with, this is not a good fit for me. It just doesn't fit me, and I'm not willing to twist myself into a pretzel. Lastly, choose your words wisely. Something I learned very specifically. I had just gotten promoted to a sales manager at Cisco. I'd only been there about 4 years. And our senior vice president from the headquarters came in, and he and I had a great relationship, so there was no issue there. And he's talking to me and all of this, and it's like, I was so loving what I was doing because I had worked hard to get into Cisco. I knew that's where I wanted to work. And I said to him, George, I'm really happy with where I am. I'd only been a manager for like 9 months, and he's talking about all these other things. And I'm like, man, I'm just really starting to get my teeth into, this one. Little did I know that this was a long range conversation he was having. I thought he was coming in to see how I was doing in my current job that they had just promoted me to do. A year goes by, and I'm watching my peers who have maybe the same quota, maybe not, maybe less tenure, whatever, and they're all getting promoted to director. Long story, I sit down with him, like, George, I don't understand. What am I not doing? He said, Jeanne, you told me you weren't interested. I was like, when did I tell you that? Well, you said, I was like, oh my God. I had no clue. I was talking over here and he was listening over here. Once we resolved it, I was promoted within 6 months. I mean, I lost money as a result of it, but I learned a lesson. So choose your words wisely. Make sure you understand what the conversation is, especially with higher ups. but with everyone in that kind of situation, that you understand the conversation you are having, because too often, to Anna's point, women kind of have some other, characteristics that notoriously work against us if we don't do our due diligence up front in those areas.
That is a very, very good point.
Yeah.
I
That's
still cry over
something that
it.
has like been in the back of my head, but not something that I have fully implemented, I guess, in how fresh my career currently is.
Yes. Managing
Sorry.
a career is a career by itself.
Yeah.
Definitely. Our next question is, have you had to make any sacrifices both personally and professionally throughout your career? If so, what were they?
Well, I'll start. I think this was mine to start, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll start with ending on that other one. One of the things he did was he asked me to if I could relocate to Silicon Valley, and I said no. And that was a hard no. There was no question. I have had a husband, still have him, husband with kids and all that. I was like, I can't. I'm not moving them all over. There's much more to it than that. But it was a hard no, and that wasn't the reason I didn't get promoted, because there were other opportunities. But that ruled out a whole piece, and I was fine with that. I knew that was a possibility. I wasn't willing to make that. So that is a sacrifice, but in the long run, it didn't really hurt me. But the bigger ones are, you cannot have it all. I want to say that very clearly. You can't have it all. You cannot, at least not at the same time. And this whole concept of having it all and work-life balance and all of that, I'm like, if I have to read another LinkedIn about it, it's insane, because it perpetuates this treadmill. You can have it all depending on what you're willing to give up. Everything is a trade. Everything in life is a trade. There are no free lunches, right? So if you want to work in a high-powered environment at a certain level, it means a certain number of hours. Now, we can work to change that, but until you get to some of those places, you don't have the clout to change it, right? So if you are looking to whom you marry or whom you make as your partner is key, because when you're having that kind of discussion, who's taking care of the home? And that's even without kids. And is that other person comfortable with all of that? We can't make these decisions in a vacuum. So having it all is really not the point. I'll never forget, I was driving down 97. Oh God, it's been easily 20 years ago. And there was a little kiosk in front of a church, and it said, happiness is not having what you want, it's wanting what you have. So decide what is most important to you. There's a great book called Principle-Centered Leadership, and it's about understanding who you are at your most basic and living your life with that at the core. And when you do those things, the sacrifices aren't the end of the world. You make them consciously, you know what you're doing, you know what the outcome is, and you're good with it. So to me, sacrifice, I don't know if I use that word, but that's my 10 cents on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting. What I kind of reflected on was really similar to what Jeanne just said, in that, when I was thinking about the question, I kept thinking, I wouldn't call it sacrifices, but I would call it very intentional decisions or intentional trade-offs that I've had to make. And most notably in the past year, I started my business over 3 years ago. When I first started the business, I was working 90-hour weeks. It was my baby. And I loved it. I loved building the business. I was married with no kids, and I had, the freedom to do that. And right when the pandemic hit, I had a baby. And so not only was I trying to figure out how to be a business owner, but I was also trying to figure out how to be a mom in a pandemic with no help, no contact, aside from my husband. Thankfully, we're still together after all that time. But that was a moment where I had to really say, okay, so I can be a business owner, but I can't be a business owner who works 90 hours a week. And I wanted to stay at home with my son. And so I thought, okay, so there are 24 hours in a day, so I'm going to have to make some trade-offs. But I never saw it as a sacrifice. And I do think that, going back to what Jeanne said too, this idea of understanding what matters to you, understanding what your values are. If you're always making decisions that are aligned with those values, I think you can craft a life in a million different ways. I'm a real big proponent of life design. I teach it. It's all a part of design thinking, which I love, and I live it. I teach it and I live it. And I think that, there's a really great quotation from this book, Designing Your Life, that says, each of us has 100 lives within us. And I think it's just important to note that we can live life a million different ways. We can structure our career a million different ways. And that's especially true if you become an entrepreneur, because you're in the driver's seat. And so I think it just comes down to figuring out what your goals are, setting, expectations, knowing that everything is in seasons, and how, 1 year is going to look different from the next, and you can shift and pivot and adjust. But I think that as long as you're staying aligned with those values and you're reassessing and not being afraid to be truthful with yourself about what matters and when your priorities shift, I think that you're never sacrificing, you're just making very intentional decisions. But as Jeanne said, you can't have it all. It's just about what matters to you most in that moment, knowing that 5 years down the line, that could switch and something else could take, the front seat. So those are my thoughts on sacrifice.
Thank you so much, Anna.
Yeah. Now, you both did mention a few quotes, so we have one ourselves. There's a quote saying, "Only as strong as the woman next to me." How would you both interpret that?
So this is the first time I've ever heard this quote, and I love it. And so my interpretation when I first read that was this idea of being a part of a village. And so when I think back to, the past year of doing motherhood alone and figuring it out without much support, when I think about starting a business as a solo entrepreneur, while I can pat myself on the back and say I did it, the truth is that I wouldn't have gotten to where I am in life, in my career, at OutGrowth, in my company, without the support of other women. And, I have an advisory board with women on it who are constantly encouraging me, helping me to see problems from a different angle. I really rely on women for, advice, moral support, insight. And so, I do think of myself as a product of the people I surround myself with. And so when I think about my role in that and how I can kind of pay that forward, I think of us as women really not only just having an opportunity, but a duty and an obligation to help to build up other women around us so that they can achieve the same success or greater. And I don't know if this is something in certain workplaces, I can say, unfortunately, I haven't experienced where women support other women to the fullest extent. I can say in most recent years, that has been my experience. But it just goes to show, I think, how important it is and what a difference it can make. And so I like to kind of see my role in my business and hopefully in my personal life too, is one where, I can work to constantly pay it forward, constantly build other women up, and hopefully inspire in them real greatness, and really just helping women to realize that the greatness lies within them anyway, and it's just a matter of going and getting it, and being bold enough and sure of yourself enough to go after what you deserve. So that's my hope, and I think it's a beautiful quotation. I think it's something that we as women should hope to live out day in and day out.
I love that. And I 150,000% agree with it takes a village. We come into this world by ourselves unless we're a twin, triplet, or whatever, and we typically go out by ourselves, but we don't get from point A to point B without a village. So we tend to think of that in terms of our personal life. We need to think of that in terms of our professional life, the board of directors, whatever you want to call them, reason, season, lifetime. I go back to mentors, all of that. So Anna, I could not agree more. And I think it was Madeleine Albright, although she may have stolen it too. She may not be the originator, but it was that there was a special place in hell for women who didn't help other women. So I subscribe to that one too. The irony is, I also had never heard of this quote, but I very much like it. And when I think about it, I think of things like each one bring one, each one teach one, each one, whatever. That idea of you pull as you climb, all of those metaphors, analogies, all of those things apply. Because the rising tide does lift up all boats. And so when we do that, there's a synergy that happens that cannot happen when we're only out for ourselves. And too often, especially in this country, and this is not a political statement, but capitalism is built on individualism. Okay. And the country was built on bootstrapping and all of those things. And those are wonderful, wonderful things. I'm not here to say otherwise. But when you synergize and bring others along, you magnify the success. And so we all, whether we're doing it as women or just human beings, when we bring others along, everything gets better. So that's one. I think another key thing is to really understand that bias and those things are not only other people. We as women in many cases, hold the same biases about women as men do, because we all grow up in the general same type of culture. And so we've all been getting the same messages that the men get, since we're talking men and women here. And so we suffer from some of them ourselves internally. Anna was talking earlier about imposter syndrome. That's a classic one. But we also can treat other women in that same way that men do. And so we have to check ourselves first and be looking at what we can do differently to look at other women. Way back, again, Anna, you were talking a little bit about this. Way back, it was a little different because there might have been one promotion that was going to go to a woman. And so the women had to sort of duke it out to get the one. Fortunately, that is changing. Not fast enough, but it is changing. But we have to be together. We are tied together, like it or not, for better or worse. Take your pick. We are together, and we are stronger when we're together. Think of your family, think of your kids. Whenever you have that united front, things happen. And so as individuals, we do have to be, as strong as we can possibly be, but we also have to make sure that, in this case, our sister, and there's not our sisterhood, there's not a female word for brethren. What's the female word for brethren? Whatever that word is, we need to do that with the women around us in all of our lives. And one of the best places to start is with our kids.
I love that, Jeanne.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for that. Both of you guys, just such inspiring information.
What happens when you get older? There have to be some perks.
So the next question is, what are some of your future goals? Where do you see yourself growing from here?
I read that and I'm like, I'm 62. Where do I see myself growing? It's like when you become an employee, they're like, write your goals for the next 10 years. Like, yeah, I kind of want to be out. I don't want to be doing this anymore. But, as I thought about it, it's not so much my goals. I think the first thing, listening to the dialogue and so much of what Anna said, is there are no right choices. There are only right choices for you. And the intentionality with which you make decisions makes all the difference in the world. So those are two things just wrapping up from previous. But I look at myself, I got laid off from Cisco in 2015. I was like, okay, what do I want? And I guess, what am I, whatever that age is, I'm, 55 or something like that. And I'm like, okay, what do I want to be when I grow up? I don't know, which I, by the way, think is the dumbest question ever. But again, different webinar. But I did some, with a long story short, I did some volunteering and got involved in some other things because I knew I wanted to sort of do something different than I had been doing for 30 years. And it's led me, a COO of a wealth management company. Like, how's that ever happen? Well, my skill set, those underlying skills. So I get to do something that I love. I get to do it 2 days a week. I get to volunteer outside of it. I got to build the life I wanted. Now, part of that is because I did do the hard work up front. Hard work does pay off because financially, you always have to make sure that you can do that. And so that's something we haven't addressed here. But that intentionality of choice is really key when it comes to finances. And Anna, you were talking about the 90 hours a week and so forth. Sometimes you got to do that because that's what it takes to get you the financial footing that you need to then have the freedom to make the other goals come true. So let's, back to reality. It is what it is, right? Nobody's paying your mortgage for you. Nobody's covering your childcare costs. Nobody's buying you clothes, right? You have to be able to do that. And I strongly suggest that all women be financially independent. That's not a negative. That's a positive, because when you are, your decision making can materially change. But I now get to do that. So the fruits of all of those labors, this is a long-term gain. Your career is a long-term game. And so I now am getting to enjoy the fruits of those labors, and doing things I could never have had the time to do before. Now, whether I was intentional about it, I'm a much better preacher than practitioner. I fully, fully acknowledge that. But I got to do what I wanted to do. I had a great career, even when some of them were 90 hours a week. I don't regret them. I had amazing things that I got to do. That, as a 1976 high school graduate, I could never have imagined, because it was a secretary, a teacher, work for the government. I don't remember what the other ones were, but it was like 5. Those were the things they talked to you about. And never did they say you could, work with people around the world and do, all these things. So intentionality has gotten me where where I want to be now. And so that those are my goals. I can't tell you I have a lot of goals at this point, except to enjoy the fruits of my labor, my family, my friends, and now really work on that part. And hopefully I get a lot of years to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great, Jeanne. When I was thinking about this question, what came to mind was my goal is to watch everything evolve. And granted, it's been kind of a crazy year for everybody. And I've watched, I watched my business evolve just because my role has changed. I've watched my business evolve because the pandemic has shifted the nature of experiential learning. But all throughout that, I've kind of still landed in a place that's really exciting. And so what I'm excited to do now is kind of look forward. And I've always had this main goal and this kind of core goal within OutGrowth, which is to, as I said before, help to expose people to transformational experiences that can shift the way they approach their lives and careers. And so the way that can look has evolved over 3 years, and I anticipate will just continue to evolve. So I'm excited to see where it goes. I know Jeanne was talking about, making sure that you're not closing off any doors, that you're keeping those doors open, that you're open to new opportunities. And that's kind of where I am at OutGrowth. I think that is so incredibly important, to not close off any new directions. And so I love what I'm doing. I love being an adjunct professor. I love working in human-centered design, which is now become a new offering at OutGrowth over the past couple of years. And so my goals for growth are really just to remain open, to seize the moment, and to constantly go back to those principles of life design. Does this align with my values? Does this align with the other roles in my life and in my family? And how can I continue to challenge myself while building a life that I love and that brings me fulfillment and joy? And so I'm not sure where that's going to look, but I'm excited to move forward in it.
Absolutely.
It is just so exciting.
And I really appreciate everything that you guys have said. Sitting here, I've been thinking about my own journey and how I am. I mean, we are both very fresh in our careers, but even landing where I am right now at DTC, prior the pandemic, I was living and working at an amazing design space in Baltimore. And then, of course, with the pandemic, I got furloughed. So all my plans went up in the air. I had no idea what I was doing. And thankfully, like you both have mentioned, networking is such a key thing. Victoria and I knew each other in college, and her being her amazing self kept me in mind and referred me to Steve, our CEO here at DTC. And that's how I'm sitting here with all you lovely ladies today. So you never really know the direction that your life is going to take you. And it's so reassuring to be able to sit here and know that every step of the way, no matter what hurdle you might come across, everything will be okay in the end. And you can make up your life however you want to, with no regard to anybody saying, oh, hey, you can't do this, you can't do that, because
yeah,
ultimately you can.
I can attest to that too. And I don't think Jeanne knows this as well. I know Heather does, but Anna actually is the reason that I know the person that put me in contact with Steve. So that is how I got my job as well. Like networking, it's all about who you know. And it's so easy to get down on yourself and I lost my job completely because of the pandemic. I was living in Florida working at Walt Disney World, everyone's dream come true. But so I lost my job and I had to move back home and I was very devastated from that. But you just got to keep being persistent, pushing, going through, and you never really know where you're going to end up and the people that you meet along your way, like how they're going to play into your story at the end of the day. So definitely thank you all, both of you, for just your amazing stories and your advice. And I think now we're going to open up the floor to any questions. Our contact information is now back on the screen just so anyone listening in has it. Again, this will be recorded and you guys, it'll be available on our YouTube channel that you can access through our website as well, dtctoday.com. But if there are any questions of the people that are watching right now, feel free to put them into the chat and we'll read them and have Jeannie and Anna answer them for you guys. I think we'll give everyone a couple of minutes here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. And Jeanne, it's been just so great getting to know you and hear you speak and learn about all that you've done. Really inspiring. So this has been great, everyone. I just want to thank you.
It has. And thank you, Anna. And I feel the same way. I loved listening. It's interesting that you can come from different backgrounds and have different paths, yet the diversity of the path, the fact that it was a diverse path resonates with so many people. There are very few that start out in high school and say, I want to be a this, and that's what they do their entire life. And so yet that's kind of what we still think in too many cases. So no, I enjoyed hearing it. And I love these kinds of webinars because hopefully they're safe zones for people to ask questions that they might not ask. First off, you're not on video, so you're safe. But you might not ask in other situations, and especially in situations where there is a more diverse group. Women tend to discuss more things with one another when it's only women, for better or worse.
Agreed.
So we haven't had any questions come in, but I do have one that was like in my head while we're sitting here discussing things. And it's just been a thing in my life currently, thinking about like my career path and everything. But I think it's like combating fear. Like, how do you guys combat the voices in your head telling you can't do something, or the fear of failing, or something of that sort? I don't know, whoever wants to go first.
Well, Anna, you mentioned imposter syndrome, so you're welcome to take the first shot at that if you would like.
Sure. So there was something that immediately came to mind, and I give through my company, I give these workshops on bravery, which are always really fun. And mostly women sign up for them. Surprise, surprise. Women are always working on themselves. But they're in this workshop that I lead. I put in a bunch of practices that I myself have used, especially starting a company and doing things that I found very scary and where I definitely had that imposter syndrome a lot. And one of my favorite things that I do is I started having a brave time of day or a brave time of the week where I would reserve time when I tended to have more energy or more gumption, and I would mark it on the calendar. And it was during that time every week that I would do the thing that I was scared to do. So whether it's writing that proposal, calling that person about a job interview, or, reaching out to somebody, cold calling about a position I was interested in, whatever it was, I would kind of reserve that time and go for it. And it was the reason why I reserved that time is that, one, it was scheduled, so I knew it would happen. And two, when that time was over, I could kind of mentally and emotionally retreat. And as I like to say in my workshops, I could go and run under the covers again. And so that just helped me to move the needle, push the needle, move my way forward, but in a way that didn't feel like I was so exposed all the time. Because the reality is that those voices do creep in. We do have those moments of self-doubt, and I don't know if those completely go away. I think it's about coming up with tools and practices that can help us to overcome those, even for a minute, because really you don't need to feel brave all the time. You don't need to feel confident all of the time. You just need to make sure you're baking those moments in so that you're moving in the direction that you want to move. So that's always been one of my life hacks for pushing past the self-doubt.
And I'm here to say they don't ever completely go away. They do get better because you have more data behind you. But I think a key point is to deal in facts. So that same gentleman that I didn't get the same, senior vice president that I used the wrong words kind of thing. And I did eventually get a few years later, I get a call. He's the chair of that global board and he wants me to interview for this. He wants me for the job. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. What am I going to do with like 5 senior vice presidents from around the globe? And I'm running oh my God. I'm literally on vacation in the living room going, oh, okay, well, like all cheer and I hang up and my mother was with me. I'm like, I don't know how to do that. And so, and I think that's natural for all of us. But then when you allow your emotions to kind of distill a little, there's a couple things. There's the Ben Franklin. I'm a big fan of the Ben Franklin, T of pros and cons in terms of factual pros and cons. But it's also about dealing in the facts of you. He would never have asked me to interview if he didn't think I could do the job. He was the chair. So, he had more to lose in many ways than I did. So you have to start believing what other people are telling you about what you can do. And that for me was a big one. I'd have been in sales a lot longer and made a lot more money. But I was afraid. And I don't know what I was afraid of. I may not have been better than anybody else, but I couldn't have been worse. I mean, I have abilities. So I think you kind of have to talk yourself off the ledge and look at your accomplishments and literally write the facts of what you have done. Put it in black and white because it's really hard to argue when you see it written, what you've accomplished. Look at your resume. If your resume doesn't help you, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah.
True.
Thank you both. And then we do have a couple questions. So one of them says, what is some advice on getting clarity on which way to go professionally when you could see yourself on multiple paths?
That's a good one.
I don't know that there's a right answer. Again, I go back to facts. Think beyond the basics of that path. What does it mean to you personally? What does it mean in the long run? Go outside. This is just obviously off the top of my head, but think outside of what does it mean if I say yes and my next few years are going to look like? How does it play in longer term? And I hate to say it, but think of the finances. Because again, nobody else is paying. I get to do what I'm doing now because I did what I did then. And that's not to say it's all about money, but if certain personal tastes run more towards the luxurious, money is going to matter in a different way than if you have really simple and very sparse requirements. You have to be honest with yourself about how this fits into your larger life picture because a career is just a part of you. And so sometimes it's hard. There's a lot of them you can do. And guess what? One of them you choose, you may not find you like it anyway, but let's just say you do. What does that mean for the rest of your world? That context to me is really key.
Yeah, I would just echo that. When I think about weighing job opportunities or directions, I think about the tangibles and the intangibles. What do the commutes look like? Because a commute is a huge part of your life and your day and the quality of your life. What are they paying? Are there opportunities for growth? What direction would lend more opportunities for you to evolve well past that position? I also look at work culture because I think who your boss is and who you'll be working with are just so important. And I think things that people don't necessarily consider a lot when considering job offers, but they can make or break your experience. So thinking, like Jeanne said, of your life is bigger than just a job and what do you value and how does that job fit into that, whether it's the flexibility of a schedule or the ease of a commute or the type of life that that particular salary can offer you are bigger picture things to consider.
Oh yeah. We live in an area where Northern Virginia, if you're in tech, Northern Virginia, I'm like, oh my God. I mean, that's there. You got to drive a lot in certain roles. The one thing Anna, when you were saying before, are you with regard to oh my God, I just forgot it. Your boss. The only thing I would caveat with bosses change jobs too, so that's a consideration. But the culture of the company, as best you can gauge it prior to working there, is bigger, just because a boss can get promoted or change or whatever, get fired, all kinds of things. So just be careful hanging it on a boss too. You want to you don't want to
Good
work
point.
for somebody you don't like, obviously, or you don't agree with, but don't expect that boss is going to be there the whole time. That would
Yeah.
So the next question that we have is, what is your best advice for a woman who has always been seen one way but wants to change the direction in which her peers see her and connect with her to further and better her career?
Depends on, to me, it depends on the size company too, because in a smaller company, that's going to be a little harder than in a larger company because there's so many other places to move. You have to, it's kind of you have to fake it till you make it or whatever. You have to start changing how you spend your day, number one. And they're not quick fixes. What brand you're putting out there, back to my earlier statements, what brand you're putting out there. I would be talking to people about why certain people, not just anybody, but people with whom you interact normally, regularly, what they see, people you trust, but to get feedback as to what the perception is. If you're in a big enough company, you can change roles. And sometimes it's like that parallel parking. It's time to change jobs. And sometimes that's the quickest, easiest way than having to completely rebuild how you're seen. But you have the options. It's about you taking control and saying, I don't want to be seen. And I use this all the time as the girl that takes the notes all the time. And just sort of a stereotype, but I don't want to be seen that way anymore. Well, what are you going to do about it? Because you have to take the first steps. And that could be everything from just changing the way you dress, you present, you interface with people, asking for people's input, as well as changing jobs within a company or changing companies.
Yeah, there's this quote that I always kind of live by, and that is, don't let anybody else determine your career. And so that's always really stuck with me because I can relate to that feeling. I've been in that situation where you're seen a certain way and you want to kind of pivot or transition or move up or move in a new direction, but you're kind of locked into this role or locked into this way that people see you. And so to that, I would say, I think it's really important to determine, where is it you want to go? How do you want to be seen? What really reflects you, rather than thinking just about, how others may see you? What is it that you want to exude? And I think that will kind of determine your next steps, whether it's, okay, I really want to move into a project management role. So let me start networking within, people who work with other project managers, and let me do some informational interviews, and let me see what kind of skill sets or certifications I could get in project management. And, how can I kind of offer my services or my skills on a volunteer basis just to be around other people who do this? And so starting to think, how can you immerse yourself in experiences that will help you to naturally make that transition, and may also open you up to some other opportunities along the way that could lead to new career directions too. But I think it's really important, the reason why I left my previous job to start a company was that I kind of saw my life as pretty linear if I stayed where I was, and I wanted to grow myself professionally and not let the traditional limitations or boxes of the company I was in to kind of dictate where I was going next. And so in order to break from those molds and break from those shackles, I think it's just important to kind of intentionally move forward. But that comes down to a bit of life design work, or however you want to call it, but just really understanding at your core, what is it that you want to be doing? What would be fulfilling? What would be challenging? What would help you to grow? And then starting to kind of look into practices and methods and directions that can help you to get there. And I think people's perceptions will naturally shift once those wheels are put in motion.
Definitely agree with everything both of you just said. Thank you so much for that. And then we have one more question, and it is, how are you keeping employees engaged during this time?
For me, it's always been the same, regardless of time. It's compassion, flexibility, and connection. I have always been a leader who I knew my employees. I knew their families. I may not have I've met many of them because I've worked virtually. So you always had kids come in. That always happens. It just happens. Um, but so I knew their kids. I knew when they were going to a different school or college, high school, whatever. I knew those kinds of things because we would share, but I also shared of me. I shared of myself that same thing. And I'm not saying all the gory details, but enough that you have a connection. I've always thought, believed that it's harder, to be blunt, it's harder to screw somebody over when you actually know something about them, and so the more you can connect without blurring lines or crossing lines. But so that's one. I think flexibility. Okay, if it doesn't get done today, does the world really end? Probably not. So really picking your battles as to where you hold somebody's feet to the fire. And so, well, not or, and if you have a problem, come talk to me. Tell me about it. And we'll find a way to work around it. We all have things that happen. And COVID is the biggest thing, and we're all in the same boat. So to me, acting like my life is all perfect. Now, granted, it's a little easier because I don't have kids at home. I'm not trying to homeschool while I'm trying to work. So I get that I'm not in the same boat as so many, but I understand it. I mean, you have to be brain dead to not know that this is happening. So that flexibility of, okay, if this time doesn't work, when can you do it? Let's talk about that. And compassion. I think that just as human beings, we need a little more of that in our life. I think that's something that women as a whole can bring to our current country's view of work. I was trying to find where I'm like, I don't want to say some of those words. I'm just because it's not the only way.
Any better than Jeanne? Those top three that's it. That just summarizes it. And I do think that, to Jeanne's point, this pandemic has I think in some ways set women back in the workplace, but I also think it's helping us to reconstruct our view of what work looks like, how a work schedule can look, a full-time work schedule, and how, we need to maybe reprioritize how we balance work, family, or work and outside of work life. The only other thing that I would add to that is in that connection piece that Jeanne was talking about, something I found really useful is finding really unique, kind of fun, lighter ways to connect with people. So we get to meet over Zoom a lot, obviously. I think we'll eventually get to the place where we can do some distanced outdoor, gatherings as the weather gets nicer. But an article that I read at the beginning of the pandemic that I've now integrated into all of the classes that I teach is helping us to connect through the senses as much as possible. So since we can't be in person, finding ways to incorporate see, hear, touch, feel as a method and a mechanism for creating group activities, just to help people feel more connected. Because as much as we can be on Zoom all day, I think the general kind of feeling is that we're all still pretty disconnected when we're virtual. So finding those ways to connect in a more authentic way, even if that's just more one-on-one, I think is going to help employees to feel more supported. Because I think everybody right now is kind of craving that human interaction. So as close as we can get to in person by the way that we structure our virtual interaction, I think makes a big difference.
Absolutely.
Well, that is the last question that we have. So, and I think that there's no more, because I think if people were to ask, they would have typed them in. But thank you both so much again for all of that amazing insight and just your stories and your experiences. It really does help, people starting out in their career. I'm sure people that are in their careers in the middle of them still can take what you guys said and make it apply to their situations. And just appreciate both of you taking the time to be with us, talk with us, and get to know each of you a little bit better.
Thank you all so much. This was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I will tell both of you, Steve thinks very highly of both of you. So good job.
Thank you.
And just to reiterate one more time, this webinar is recorded. So for anybody that is logging on right now or has logged on in the middle of this, it will be available on the replay, as well as our website, dtctoday.com, and also on our YouTube channel as well. So thank you both so very much for coming and reflecting on all your journeys and giving us an abundant amount of advice today. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their Wednesday.
A good way to spend.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.